by design is a really important concept. You know what I'm going to do is actually, let me just kick this off with this type of thing. So, okay. So, if anyone wants to get hold of me, I am a hands-on architect. I am not one of those in the ivory tower. If you want to get hold of me, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm more than happy to have conversations, to discuss things. I've had people reaching out saying they're trying to implement it in their company, what recommendations, some advice, some obstacles they're having, not just technical, sometimes it's people obstacles. So let me know. I'm more than available. I will get back to you as soon as I can, and more than happy to help in any way. I'm not a freelancer, so there's no money involved. I believe in open source. I believe in sharing knowledge and information. So I really am just a contributor in the community. So what I'd like to do is just get started here a little bit. And today I'd like to go over just a little bit of an overview about privacy by design in general. I'm going to talk a little bit about data usage agreements. It's something that I put together. I'm a real big Rust developer. I enjoy it. Not great at it, but I enjoy it so much. It's an amazing language. Doesn't matter what language you're using, but I did put together a software development kit around privacy by design. And one of the things I put in was a data usage agreement. So I'm going to go over that today. I also will talk about data transfer chains, which is another architectural design, as well as some of the data security guards that I put in, and even, what can we do for forward thinking? Now, what's interesting is, as you were saying, Mike, in our last conversation, we talked about DAS, data as a service. That is, believe it or not, a lot to do with privacy by design. So I'll get into that later on. First thing I really want to just touch on is the concept of, do we all understand what security versus privacy is? So security basically is, yes, I've got encrypted. It's encrypted on flight, it's encrypted at rest. We have access controls, people aren't getting in. We got firewalls, we're doing audit logs, we make sure we know who attached to what. That's all fine. We're doing multi-factor authentication to verify. So our house is sound. It is secure. We've got the gates, we've got everything in place that no one is getting in unless they're supposed to. Great. Your architecture is secure. But my question is, how's your privacy? So an example is someone says, you know what, I want to build this house, it's all secure, but the business says, I want my bedroom to have a beautiful view on the backyard. Well, that's fine, but is it really private? Because how do you actually enforce, how the data is being used? How do you know if you're fully transparent with your data, and to the actor, the one who owns the data, are you communicating well with them, saying, hey, I used your data to do this. Is that okay with you? You also want to be able to track it, because as we all know, in our architecture and our systems, data is copied all over the place. And if you look at things like GDPR, for example, I have a right to have my data removed. So if I request my data to be removed, can companies do that? Do they know all the places they put it? Now, don't forget, there's a lot of places. There's backups, there's caching, there's on machines, temp files, all sorts of stuff. Also, don't forget, are we minimizing our data that we're collecting? Only collect what you need for the purpose and intent at the last responsible moment. And so these are the type of questions when we get into ownership of the data. Are we actually being good stewards of the data that we take on and that responsibility? Now, one thing is really cool when you get into data privacy, there are strategies, and there are some really well-documented strategies of what we can do. And so minimization, separating your data, extracting it, hiding it, you need to be able to be informative. I can tell you what I'm doing with your data all the time. So if anyone comes on and I get into an application online, I should be able to know, what did you do with my data and where is it? And have those controls in place, enforce them, and also demonstrate it. Imagine what a company would have for good PR if they were demonstrating what we're doing to keep your data private and making that public. It's like an advertisement. Look how good we are at being responsible stewards of your data. And so what I did is I had sort of data as a service as an architectural pattern that has multifacets, as well as not just eventing, but it's also the data model itself, which is part of that architecture. And that was another webinar we did. So if you're interested, I believe, Mike, it was recorded. So if they register, they could actually review it and rewatch it. Is that correct?
Absolutely. In fact, Also found at nofluffjuststuff.com, and I'll share the page here at the end as well. But
Fantastic.
all the replays are available, and a lot of upcoming cool stuff too.
Yeah, that's one of the great things about No Fluff, Just Stuff. So it's the information is available and reachable. I also came up with on my own a privacy by design software development kit that sort of sits on top of that DAS architecture. And then I'll go over that one. The DAS architecture, believe it or not, if you're implementing a DAS architecture, is privacy by design. And let me go over a few of the really cool aspects of it. So if we look at some of the strategies, for example, minimization, okay? So if we look at minimization, when data comes in and it goes on to the broker to be to be handled, I can say, yes, I store it in a generic, I call it my genesis. This is where the raw data is being stored. And based upon where it should be rerouted to, based on the data itself, which is part of that DAS document data model, they'll say, okay, I'll go on to this topic to be processed. Or no, I have to go to a different topic to be processed. Just by doing this one architectural step, you've now minimized the data. You're not sending all the data everywhere down the stream. You're only sending it to where it needs to go for the intent it was meant to be used for. So that right there is privacy by design. I'm not sharing data where it doesn't belong, and I'm doing it at the last responsible moment. So that's a big thing to think about when you're thinking of architecture. The other one is with the DAS, and this is when it comes into privacy by design with the kit I made. You can do your own, these are just concepts. One thing that was interesting is people were saying, well, listen, it's secure. I've encrypted it in flight, I've encrypted at rest, it's all good. My whole take is no, the data packet itself needs to be encrypted with its own unique key for that event that you're working on. The next event is encrypted with its own key. The reason is this: yes, I'm allowed to get the data, but should I be using it? And so if the data itself is encrypted and moved around with the purpose and intent, then those who only are allowed to use the data for purpose and intent will be able to unlock it and use the data. I don't know where I'm putting these microservices. I don't know the machines. I don't know I'm moving them all over the place. So the microservice itself is, I know what I need to do with this type of data. So it's yet another way of sort of looking into how can we ensure that the data is being used for the intent that was allowed and authorized by the data owner. The other way is separation of your data. By using this microservices and this DAS architecture, and by the way, I'm saying DAS, it's event-driven, right? This is an event-driven architecture with microservices. By separating the data out, you also are doing privacy by design. You're making sure that, for example, customer address information is not mixed in with the order information. And if you want to put them together, there'll be a specific intent and purpose for that in a microservice that says, I'll pull it together for when you need it. So just separating your data alone is a huge move forward to privacy by design. So minimization, separation, and control. We're actually, by doing these topics and moving the data based upon the data itself, deciding where it needs to go with the microservices listening to those topics, we're ensuring that the data is being controlled, that we're not using it for things that shouldn't. And with those keys, for example, we're controlling who should be allowed to use it and for what purpose. Another part of the DAS platform itself is the data model. Real quickly, I won't go over this too much, but there are parts about the data model itself that is privacy by design. I've abstracted it. As you can see, I have category, subcategory, I have metadata, I have tagging, but the data itself is in this data object. It's encrypted, bundled, and in the data object. So if I can make decisions on the wrapper, on the metadata, on the fields, on the tags, to know where it should be routed, what should I do with it? But I'm not exposing the data itself that shouldn't be exposed. For example, customer's address or credit card information. That's actually in that data object. But there might be metadata that says, this is a credit card information, and therefore I can route it accordingly. So I've abstracted that out. I've also separated the data because I'm actually able to route it, and I've minimized it. So then I make sure that only what I need is being displayed to make these programmatic decisions where it should go and how it should be handled. So then I got into privacy by design and created a software development kit for myself. And made it open source for anyone that wants to use it. And I put in 3 basic sort of features. The first feature is a data usage agreement. The second one is a data tracker chain. And the third one is a security guard. And I'll go over those real quickly. I'm going to go through this real fast, and then I'll open it up to questions. So it's not going to be an entire talking session throughout the whole thing. This is what I love. Oh my gosh. I go on the website, and this is your privacy agreement. I'm like, okay, I'll read the fine print as a customer and try to figure it out if I even get around to it. But it's even harder when you're a designer and you're trying to enforce this policy, because it's not broken apart into little pieces. It's not, how should I say, user stories in Agile, right? It's more of, here's a huge document, try to enforce it. So imagine if we actually coded our software and our architecture the same way we do Agile with user stories in little deliverables. So imagine if I could enforce the fact that this information can be used for billing. This information can be used for campaign management. This information can be used for shipping address information. All of a sudden, I can create these little contracts for each type of a purpose. And that end user, the owner of the data, can say, yes, you're allowed to use it for this, but not that. And programmatically, I'm actually able to enforce it based upon that miniature contract that's passed with the data. So what I did is I started looking at, if I can actually control it, if I can demonstrate this, I could create a data usage agreement. And this data usage agreement is helping the data owner be informed of what we're going to do with your data based upon what they agreed to. Not only that, it also gives them control to say, no, you can't use it this way. And we don't have to hard code anything. It's being driven by the data. This contract is attached to the DAS object as an attribute in that wrapper section. All I got to do is look at the contract on that packet as it's coming through and say, I'm sorry, you're not allowed to use it for this intent. That's what the data owner said. It also enforces us to actually do it programmatically instead of hard coding or configurations. I can now enforce privacy of that data by data, making it data driven. And I can actually demonstrate it. At any time, I can audit and say, yes, we ignored this because of this contract was not in the payload, in the wrapper. So a data contract is one thing. And then I got the data tracker. A data tracker is something I put in to basically say, you know what, I don't know where this data's been. It's going all over the place, especially when you got brokering and eventing. It's been in this database, it's over here, it's over there. So what I do is I created a data tracker that's basically built on top of blockchain and say, you know what, this tracker is attached to that DAS document as the data is moving, that one data packet is moving, that message, that event. And I'm going to know wherever you stop, just add yourself. And as it keeps moving, I now have lineage as to where it lived. So I can inform anyone at any time and say, yes, I have a data packet. And by the way, this is all the points of where it stopped. So if you want to delete it, these are all the things you should look for, all the places you should go. It also allows it to be controlled. So that way I can say, I'm sorry, you came from this third-party questionable place. I'm not going to process that data. It's not a valid place that I'm okay with. Now I also can demonstrate it because at any point a user could, a data owner could say, where's this data come from? Where's it going to? Well, I can just pull out the data tracker and say, here's all the places it stopped. Imagine programmatically being able to show that on the web or in a person's private portal, obviously, not to everyone, and be able to say, you want to know where your address has been? Here you go, right? And I can programmatically just read it from the tracker. And the last one is the security guard. Security guard helps us hide things. It helps us make sure that even processes are not seeing things they should not see. And it's one thing to say, yes, it's secure at landing, it's secure in flight, don't worry about it. But how do I know the data didn't accidentally get to a process that where it wasn't supposed to be, that microservice, right? And the other one is it actually allows us to do controlling, to say, well, yeah, you might have got to you, but if you don't have the key to decrypt it, you're not going to be able to do anything with it. And that's how I can enforce it, to make sure even if it accidentally gets somewhere, I'm making sure it can't be processed. And that's privacy by design. And the big thing is it separates, right? By encrypting that data and putting the metadata around it and securing that up, I've separated it from other data. So if someone gets in, they only have David's address, not Mike's address, because they're handled as separate packets. Privacy by design. I want to reduce the amount of spillage in the breach if it ever were to happen. So that's all that I had for the explanation. It's a lot. It's a lot. And this is just some ideas to get you started.
Well, we'll go ahead and open this up for questions.
Yeah.
We've got two options, folks. Option one is certainly take advantage of the chat. What I'll do, just for the benefit of the folks watching the recording, I'm going to I'll read these out to give some context to the answers that we get in the recording. But if you are not feeling shy, you feel free to unmute, even turn your camera. But do remember that this is recorded and available online. So since we're on the topic of privacy, that's an important thing to mention. I had a question right out of the gate as you were going through those slides. Now, uh, on one of your slides where you were talking about the DAS architecture and being deliberate in where you're sending events to. Now, there's something that kind of goes off in my head. When I think of event-driven architectures, when I think of PubSub, one of like the golden rules that I've always striven, whatever. One of those rules is producers should not know about consumers, and consumers should not know about producers.
Mhm.
And that seems to be at odds with what you suggested there. What are your thoughts on that? Because the way I've always kind of built these types of event-driven systems is I publish an event. I know where I'm publishing events to, but I don't know anything about who's grabbing that downstream. And you're saying you should know who's grabbing these downstream because you want to track this kind of chain of
Well,
custody and where these things are going. Help me kind of reconcile these two
yeah,
views.
yeah. So I'm not saying that they have to know each other, because remember, it's data driven, right?
Mhm.
So in this case, let's say a data packet comes in and says, this is David Seitz's address and it's for shipping. On that data packet in the meta field, or in the metadata itself, is here's the contract. You can use this data, whatever is in that encrypted data object that's attached inside. You can use this for billing and for shipping, nothing else, no marketing. So that contract is actually attached inside of that data packet, inside that payload. The data itself, my address and everything, is encrypted as the data object in that packet. So think of it as a wrapper on top. Now,
Mhm.
when that data moves down to another topic, whichever topic it chooses based upon the metadata, such as the DAS pattern is saying, whatever microservice is picking it up, the subscription is saying, I'm going to look at this, and subscription says, I'm only allowed to look at things that are meant for shipping. Okay, this data packet has a contract that is allowed shipping. I can look at it and I'll process it. If, for example, a data packet gets on there, a DAS document gets onto the onto the marketing topic, the marketing topic subscriber says, I'm looking for things that have the contract for marketing. Oh my gosh, this one doesn't have it. Therefore, I can't use it. That contract is not attached to the document itself, the data itself. Remember that DAS document, the data model is important. Up here, you have the metadata, you got the contract, you got the tracker. Down here inside the data packet is your encrypted data object where your addresses and all kept. So that abstraction itself of that metadata is able to actually say, are you allowed to do what you need to do? And the subscriber is the one that says, I'm looking for shipping contracts. I'm looking for billing contracts. I'm looking for marketing contracts. So all those subscribers have to do is look at the wrapper metadata and say, that contract's not there. Great that you put it on my topic, but I'm going to ignore it because I'm only allowed to do marketing things. So that's where those microservices and the pub subscribe are truly decoupled. They don't know about each other. Instead, the rules of what you can do with the data is on the data. It lives with the data as it moves. So therefore, if I put that contract on that data object and I send it downstream, everyone will know this is how you're allowed to use this data. And anybody, any of those subscribers can look at it and say, oh, my contract's not on here. I can't use it. thanks for putting it on my topic, but I can't use it. I'm not allowed to. And so that's where that is truly decoupled. And the pub subscribe, they don't know each other. They don't have to.
Okay. Actually, while we're on this topic, I'm gonna go through these questions slightly out of order. But since we're talking about this in particular, would you mind going back to that slide where you had the data track?
Sure. Yep. Let me just do it quickly. And I'll go into screen share. Yep. This is the one.
I believe so. It's either.
Yeah, that was the data track.
Yeah, I think so. Let me see. Mario, is this what you were referring to there?
Oops.
Yes, thank you, guys. The question is, how can we ensure this design in the applications or in the data repositories that are not using the broker? Because it seems like this design is obviously focused, or the assumption is that every data should be passing through a broker. So what happened to the applications or data repository that do not use that broker?
Gotcha. Yep. So you don't have to use a broker. Let's say I'm doing micro batches. Okay. I have these records, and let me move actually up to the slide here, this one. Oops. So this is a DAS object, data object. So my DAS document. My DAS document has all of the attributes in the top in here. Don't look at the data object right now, but everything about it that sort of explains whatever is in this data object. So down in this data object attribute, can everyone see my mouse, or is it not? I don't know if you can see my mouse. You can.
Yes,
okay.
yes, we can.
Yep. So in this data object, imagine the data object being an encrypted binary. That's what I do in my kit. In my software development kit, I encrypt it and I turn it into binary and I attach it. So I don't know what's inside of it, but I do know that it came from this source, and these are the categories. And by the way, this was the author of the iStore app sent it in. It doesn't have to be processed, or it needs to be processed. It hasn't yet. And in here would be my data usage agreements. And if you go actually online, it's crates.io. That's the Rust sort of repository for all the public packages, modules, libraries, where they're going. We call them crates. And you can go into crates.io and look up PDB, privacy by design, so PbD, and then you'll come up with my kit. And in it, you can click the documentation. I even give examples. So if you wanted to download this kit, you get running examples in the whole thing. And the reason I'm saying that is this data usage agreement has a structure to it. It's an object, but I can parse through that and say, this is the agreement. And that's where those agreements are that I was talking about. So if I'm a microservice and I'm going to, or whatever job I'm doing, I'm going to pull a record off of that database table. Let's say you're using MySQL. In the MySQL, you know, here's the JSON that's stored in the column. I'm going to pull it out, or maybe it's stored in separate columns with the data object stored as a separate column. I'm going to pull that record out of the database and I'm going to process it. I'm going to process it on its own, right? Now, in that case, the batch job is saying, hey, read all these records from the database, pop them out, and run through them as separate threads, multi-threading. If you can't multi-thread, fine, let's do one at a time. And so it's going to look at those contracts saying, can I process this? Is this a billing contract? Am I allowed to use it for billing? Am I allowed to use it for shipping? And so that's one way of doing it without even getting into the data itself. So you don't need the brokering. All I'm saying is if you do use the brokering, you're already even adding on to privacy by design, because you're separating around exactly what Mike said. The pub subscribe, they don't know each other. So that's the whole thing, right? Because you're trying to separate out those processes, but you can do it without brokering. You don't need that one. I've dealt with many systems. The reality is companies are not all eventing, right? We have legacy, we have batch jobs, we've got big relational databases. That's reality. So this can still be done. You can still do privacy by design without brokering. I hope that answered your question.
Yes, David. Thank you very much. Yes, thank you.
Sure.
All right, I'm going to start. I'm going to go back to sort of a FIFO model now for the questions that have been coming in, and we've got one from Steve, and I think this is going to be a big topic, but definitely one that we need to approach. So Steve asks, what strategy have you found helpful for applying this design to large and/or legacy databases? And so for large, definitely hundreds of table, and consider a legacy app sort of a monolithic DB with something around 300 tables. Uh,
Yep.
would you recommend those meta privacy related attributes on every non-def table? I'm not sure, Steve, what you mean by non-def, but
Non-defined maybe, or so I'll start answering the question. And Steve,
definitions
definitely
table.
definitions. Okay. Yep. So this is one of the things I've dealt with some of the legacy when it gets into those big databases. No, you don't want to put it into each and every one. Relational databases are separated already, right? You're having your address separate from your credit card, separate than the person's name. So believe it or not, that's even privacy by design. As long as you're ensuring, and that's what views came out originally way back in when SQL was coming out, that you lock down who can see what type of tables based on intent. That's where the views came in originally, was for security reasons. But you want to make sure that when someone hits the database, they can only see the tables they need. They meaning an application, right? So if an application is just pulling out customer info, make sure it can only see the tables it needs to see to pull out the customer info. If a microservice is going to edit it, it only has access to what it needs. That set aside, one thing I've done to sort of migrate towards microservices and eventing from those big tables, I actually put in an abstraction layer in between. So before it goes to that table, I'm actually pumping it through a broker. So if you put in an abstraction layer between what's coming into the database itself and right into the database, you'll have the flexibility then to grow this in and start processing on the side in parallel as it's happening, to eventing, to whatever you want to do, and wrapping those items up. And actually looking at the data and saying, okay, I'm going to separate this data that came in into 3 objects, my address, my person's information, and the product information. And I'll wrap those contracts around those and send them out. Meanwhile, it's still going in, right? Because we can't just ignore legacy. We can't ignore our normal environment that we're working in. It's not cut over and now we're strategic with magic. It's got to happen slowly. And sometimes it takes years to make that journey. On the other side, though, that's fine for go forward. But when I have the data in the data warehouse or wherever you're putting it right now with 300, 1,000 tables, you want to slowly then start moving that data and migrating it out. And that's where you're going to write a job to actually say, I'm going to start going through these records. I'm going to move them out onto my strategic platform. And as I do, then I'll remove them from the database. And now they're separated out through the broker. So that's a very slow migration. And yeah, you're probably processing a few at a time, because what you're trying to do is say, I put my abstraction layer in, this is my floodgate, it's letting it go through. When I'm ready to start moving towards strategic, I turn the dial and I now route it only here. That abstraction layer is important because it gives me time to work on the legacy data and moving it out. You don't always want to move it out. Sometimes you want to keep it in a relational database. So long story short on that one, if it's in the relational database, I would not put the contracts into the data right away. I would try to somehow put it in as far as columns, but that's not your first goal. Your first goal is build that abstraction so that you can start routing and then slowly moving over. I hope that answered your question. I hope I understood it correctly.
Yeah. I'll keep watching the chat. Oh, Steve says thank you. So that sounds like a definite affirmative on that topic.
Okay.
So,
and and if anybody wants to reach out to me on LinkedIn and say, I was confused, I'm available. So any discussions, absolutely.
And that is one thing that I've always loved about the no fluff community, is the folks are extremely generous, especially after the fact, kind of keeping these conversations going. So tremendous resource. Do definitely take advantage of that. Next question I've got here is from Brian. And I think this is a great one because, the quote unquote right to be forgotten seems a little nebulous as a concept. So Brian says, in the event that you need to honor a right to be forgotten request, how much of the customer's data do you actually delete? And particularly, don't you have to keep at least some of it for some sort of record for audit and compliant purposes, particularly in an event-sourced system? That's one of those places where I feel like this gets really, really tricky.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on
Okay.
that?
So one thing I've learned is I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not going to pretend to be. I go to my DPO, my data privacy officer. If you don't have one, you definitely want to contact your legal department, because you're right. The right to be forgotten. There is a certain amount of what needs to be forgotten, and some things you have to hold on for records retention. For example, legal documents of records retention, 3 years, 7 years, 10 years. There might be reasons for the system itself needs to hold on to the data X number of days until the batching job finally kicks off and runs at the end of the month for billing. There's a whole bunch of different reasons. So definitely contact your privacy officer and get details on that. But that's where that tracker comes in, because sometimes I don't know where all the places it's been. And so if you can make sure you know where all of the places that data is touched, you can then make decisions and say, okay, it's touched these 3 consumers, right? These subscribers. I want to delete it from there. So I'll ask that microservice on that subscriber, which should have its own API, by the way, and interface, to say, can you please remove this from your database? That 4th subscriber, I need to hold on to because the billing isn't finished until end of the month. But when the end of the month rolls around, I'll make sure that's on the queue. I'll make sure that gets done. So on that case, I will say, I'm not a legal person. I'm not telling you right or wrong of how to do it. Talk to your officer, but you're spot on. There are things where you have to know, I got to hold on to the data a little longer. For auditing purposes, to prove that it was deleted, as long as your audit does not include the private data they wanted to delete, and that's what comes, it's a round problem. It's one of those crazy, chicken and egg scenarios. I want proof that you deleted my information, but to do that, you got to have my information that tell me it's me who asked for it to be deleted, and you can prove it that David was deleted. So that's, once again, where you sometimes want to use sort of hashes or keys that are looked up, because once again, separation is important. What you're trying to do is make sure you can't reverse engineer. Or as Netflix learned, and you got to read that story, it's amazing. Netflix, when they did their award for coming up with great algorithms, they were, believe it or not, breached with data, because some people found out I could use augmented data from movie databases and stuff to find out the customer's information just by when was the rating given. I don't know the person's name, but I've hit all the social media and I found out that's the date and time range. It's probably David. And so you want to make sure it can't be reverse engineered.
I'm looking for this. I'm looking for this story right now. And
I think there is one. The book I was reading. It's about making decisions, data-driven decisions. I'll see if I can find the book for you. And it actually, the first chapter was all about that and how Netflix came up with it. And so one of the things you learn, I happen to be working at a nonprofit organization for data privacy, and we do certifications there. And one of the things that they do have in their training actually is about noise. You want to add noise to your algorithms, to your aggregations. You don't want it to be so exact that I can reverse engineer. So if you say, what's the average, number of people with this income, I'm not always going to come up with exactly 2.5. It might, you call me once, it's 2.75. You call me a second time, it's 2.91. It's good enough that you get the idea, but you'll never be able to reverse engineer, and that's called noise. So those are some of the things, yeah.
So there's another question here on legacy systems as well. So Claude asks, how do you approach legacy systems, say an event-driven system? What steps can be taken to add privacy to the system? And I think, and I think this is where the lion's share of folks are going to be focused,
Yes.
because these are things that the laws are changing, culture is changing, and what our customers expect is changing, and but these changes happen faster than we can change or redesign our systems.
Yep.
So
Yep.
so what's your advice on adding some of this into these types of systems that could be quite messy, depending on
Yep.
a lot of factors?
So Yeah, absolutely. There's two things I always try to do right away for privacy by design. Number one is access. You want to make sure that whatever tables you have in your database have a layer on top to say only certain accounts. So let's say I have a database and I come in with a logged in account, that this account can only see these tables, and that's where the views come into play. These are the only views I can see. And the data steward in the back end is saying this view is comprised of these columns on these tables queried together, whatever you want to do. And therefore, I'm only allowed to see that view, not the underlying tables. So I still have my relational database and all the data is in one place, but I've separated out access to it through those views based upon the user's login and abilities. So if I come in as a biller and I come in as a shipper and I log on, I'm going to see two different views. Some of the information might be actually, shared. That's fine. Some may not. So that's the first thing I would do, is create that sort of access layer and make sure you're separating it out based on intent, what the intent is of that person, of that application logging in to do something. The second thing I would definitely do is there needs to be somewhere an audit of what data is going in and what's being pulled out. A lot of times we don't build that into our microservices, into our, if you're doing data as a service, as a RESTful API. If you're not doing that, whatever system you're writing, if you write it in Java and you got a data access object, somewhere I should be auditing saying this record ID, boom, 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 was pulled out, right? Or someone queried from this table at this date and time, this application did. Also, when it comes in, now remember, in those logs, and this is the biggest mistake people make, is they turn on debug or info logging level. And so all of a sudden in our logs is David's name and my address and my phone number. Well, guess what? That's not good. So make sure your logging is also at the right level, right? And if you do log something, just say record number 1257 on this table has been actually inserted. It makes it more difficult. Someone actually has to have access to go get it, but I can still look it up, okay? So, and can it be reverse engineered? Technically, yes, but that's also where the logs are not accessed by everybody. It's only a certain people that can actually access separation of roles and duties, right? So those are the two things I would do right away out of the get-go to make sure that we are actually able to inform and demonstrate that we're taking good care of your data.
And actually on that topic, so Jay asked, well, how can you evaluate a company's privacy policy? And so specifically the context here is from the outside as a user, but particularly when the policy isn't clear or it's not even posted.
Wow. So, once again, I'll be real blunt. I'm not legal. So please don't take anything I'm saying as, oh, this is legal. I heard it here, so he's good with it. I can tell you from my own years of experience and also from those strategies. So if you look over those strategies, I also have them in my code. I actually link to it in my repo. So if you go to GitHub and look me up, these sites on GitHub, you'll see my Privacy by Design kit. And in the README, I even have a link to those strategies. One of the strategies is to inform. And if you're not informing your people, if I come in and I'll say real bluntly, there are some social media platforms. They're not very fun. I go in there and I'm like, I don't even know what my privacy rights are. Or you click on it and here's that big privacy page. Or as you said, I can't even find the darn privacy. Few things is this, I will say. Number one, if you don't feel comfortable, you shouldn't be using it. That's number one. Number two, if you do not feel like you understand that privacy, then it's not informative. So if the privacy notice is in some language that you don't, I think GDPR even says that it has to be in, was it understandable, human readable, understandable, something like that, where it says you got to be able to understand it. So if a common person can't understand it, it is not privacy by design. It's not following some of those laws. One thing I will love, I've seen this in some of the systems, you got your toggles, right? Here's all the things you want to do. I want to turn off notifications for this. I want to turn on emails for that. I want to make sure that this is deleted and not saved. So when I put in my credit card information, it's not saved. And I can go through all those toggles. I can see all of the things I have control over. So that's one way of knowing if I visit a place or an application or company and I see this, they've really thought it out. I should also be able to get to that page very easily. I shouldn't have to hunt through it to find it. So I hope that answered the question. Basically speaking, if you want to know if they're really good at privacy or not, think as a customer and say, am I informed? Do I have control? Have they demonstrated it? Those are important things to know.
Awesome. And a few comments in here as well. Earlier, you mentioned data privacy officer, and worth pointing out that that is a legal requirement under the GDPR.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And there are companies like the place I work at, they do certifications internationally in different languages. So you do want to look out for places like, where I'm working as IEPP, but you want to look at a place and say, do I need the certification? If nothing more, get informed. Even if you just take the training and you say, I don't want to go for the exam. But there will be a growth in a new profession. Just like security engineering grew, you will see privacy engineers, people who come in and say, I know how to design a system for privacy in mind. And that takes experience, it takes training, and it takes, like what we're doing here, communication. No one has the silver bullet. But if we all start just talking about it and coming up with these ideas and picking holes in the ideas, just like you're doing with me, I'm going to make my designs better and I'm going to share those. So we just got to keep this conversation going in an open community.
That's a really great point. And it's sort of it reminds me, I realize how dated all of my references are becoming as I get older. But I remember the PSAs. So growing up, I watched Saturday morning cartoons, as a lot of us did. There's a whole generation, I think, that doesn't even know what Saturday morning cartoons are anymore, which is a different discussion for a different day. But I remember the PSAs at the end of GI Joe, and they always had that. They always kind of finished it with that quote that knowing is half the battle.
Yes, it is.
And you know what? That's become a mantra in like DevSecOps for me. That just knowing that, we have these compromised packages. We've got these exploit lists. I forget what they're called, but just getting that CVEs, common vulnerabilities and exploits, and just being aware of these things is half the battle, and we can't be aware of anything until we have the conversation.
And to that point, when we do Agile and we're writing our user stories, or if you're doing XP, or if you're doing success stories, or however you're doing it, when the business starts writing the acceptance criteria, when you write the validations, whatever you want to do in your format, is privacy part of those conversations? Does the business say, as an end user, I want to be able to control whether or not my email will be used for marketing purposes? To validate this, I will make sure on the screen under my settings, I can check it off, and only that. Like, is that happening? Because if we're not, we need to start those conversations with the business.
Absolutely. And
Woody Woodpecker impression. I love it.
I'm not going to do it. I'm certainly not cold. I haven't done it in a very long time. And then the other thing that Brian mentioned is, sorry, Mark. I'll practice off the mic and see if I've still got it. I probably don't. I'm still smarting from the other day when I tried to adopt my Irish brogue for St. Patrick's Day. And anyway, so the other thing that Brian mentioned in the context of the legacy systems is I mentioned broken object level authorization. And candidly, I don't know what that means.
Wow. I will be very honest. I've heard of BOLA. I never actually implemented or used it. So yeah, if we could get some clarification, that'd be excellent.
Yeah, it's Brian here about BOLA. It's one of the OWASP's top 10 API vulnerabilities to be on the lookout for. And in essence, broken object level authorization, an example of that would be, okay, I have the authorization to, as a sales rep, to see customer data. If I can see all customers' data and not just the customers in my territory, which is the way it's supposed to be, that is BOLA.
Gotcha.
Got it.
And thank you. Thank you very much. That's the conversations we need. And that right there, right? I mean, that's not just security. That is, you've exposed my data, my privacy to things, to people that shouldn't be seeing it because I'm not your customer, right? Like you said, a sales rep isn't responsible for me. They shouldn't see it. That's awesome. I did not know. I've seen BOLA as far as an abbreviation. I've never actually used it. So thank you. That's awesome.
Well,
Yep,
I want
my
to keep.
pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brian. And I want to keep rolling through these questions because we've got a few more in the queue, and we're getting close to the top of the hour, so we got to wind up soon. But there's some interesting conversations about encryption going on as well. So Mark asks, we found that even encrypting data in a database and then unencrypting for display on a page results in a pretty significant performance hit.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, it is.
And so Mark goes on, he says, I would think that encapsulating data into objects would hamper performance even more, but how would you get around this? Or is this technique really practical in a production system at all?
Yeah. So, and this is a really good point. Remember that it's being encrypted when it's being processed. So if I'm going through the eventing and it's happening in real time and I'm saying, okay, I'm going to take that data, I'm going to process it. When the microservice, the subscriber is listening to the topic and pulls it off and says, okay, I'll decrypt it and use it. Once it's in their realm, doesn't have to keep staying encrypted. It's in my realm. So it's in my database. I'm able to manage it. It's when you're passing it between actors. So an actor is a subscriber. So I'm going to pass it now. I did my billing part. Now I'm going to send it down for credit card authorization or whatever, right? And it goes on to the next topic. That's where it should be encrypted, just to make sure that it doesn't get on the wrong topic, or that the subscriber who is, you could have multiple subscribers on the same topic, right? And that only the certain subscribers should be looking at it and other ones shouldn't. Once it's in that subscriber's realm, they own it, they're responsible. No, you don't have to keep doing that one. So to your point, my realm of my microservice is I'm going to display it. Let's say there's an admin portal where only administrators who are authorized for billing is allowed to see it. You're right. I'm not going to do that. I'll encrypt it in flight, right? But I'm not going to encrypt it in the database, unencrypt it every time I want to read it. It's just when it's going from between actors. And you want to make sure that the actors is not malintent. So great question. Great. I'm glad I had a chance to clarify. I didn't know but that's a good point.
Yeah. So David, just a real quick follow-up on that. So that object that you put on your slide, do you see that as primarily a transport mechanism then, not necessarily when you would hold that data during processing, but just when you move it around?
Correct. In fact, in my development kit, I call it a transport set.
Okay.
So it is only during transport, because I want to make sure that privacy by design says someone didn't get it that shouldn't for that purpose. Once that actor has received it, you're good. You know, they handle it. Yes, it's not, I'm not storing it exactly like that. When I said storage like in a database, we're talking about the batching. I'm assuming that's your staging table, right? Because let's say we're doing ETL and I'm going to stage it and then I'm going to process it. Yeah, well, it's in the staging, it's in transit, right? Temporarily on a database table and staging, I don't know where it's going to go. It should be wrapped up. Once it's gone to the actor it needs to go, you're free to do whatever you got to do. Yep.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
And we've got another question we've got about encryption from Steve is, does encryption stop the subscriber from using it, or does it depend on trust?
No, so one thing I've done in my side is the subscriber has there's two keys when I did it in my kit. I'm not saying you have to do it this way, obviously, it's just ideas, sharing ideas. There is the key, it's encrypted when it's in transit, but then there's another key for that specific packet that's attached. And so that way the private public key. And so the subscriber says, I have the key for, you know, managing billing information. And there's a different key for shipping information from a different subscriber. So once they have that one, they're able to actually decrypt it and do what they need to do.
And one
so
more
basically you're using the
ahead.
keys to ensure, I'm sorry, basically you're using the keys to ensure that only the intended audience is able to get access to it. Yep.
Oh, that's perfect. And one more, and this one is a little unfamiliar to me, so I don't know if it's IM or IM.
I love the comment, Steve.
EM?
$1 million to refactor my legacy app. I agree with you.
I'll just take $1 million and then whatever you want me to do after that, I'll figure it out. I'll make that happen. But I am or Iam, so I'm probably mispronouncing that. I apologize. Says, seems like a good case for utilizing enterprise blockchain to achieve it, or is that too narrow of a scope for enterprise data as a mix of data owned by the user and the enterprise? What are your thoughts on that?
So, it's interesting, and I will say this, I am not a blockchain guru, expert, or even advanced. I mean, I don't use blockchain that often. I used it only for the tracker model, and not even that, not data mining, right? It's not for securing it. It's just a way of housing it for the tracker. Blockchain, definitely something to look into. I personally do not have the answer for that one, so I don't have enough experience to say, here's what I recommend. Definitely look out and ask. And if you wanted to try using it out, share it with the community, see what you find out, and what your recommendations are. As I always say, everyone's an expert once you start doing it. You just got to share what you know. So I can't answer that question. I really don't know the answer to it.
I went ahead and threw 2 links into the chat here. And just for a little bit of context for folks who are watching the replay, the first link that I shared in chat is we actually have a workshop coming up next month. It's a full day, hands-on, live, instructor-led. I say live. I mean, it's of course we're all virtual, but it is a live interactive session rather than like a pre-recorded training. So in this context, that's what I mean by live. But on April 28th, Brian Sletton is giving a full day workshop on blockchain for developers. So if you want to dive deeper into that, I highly recommend sitting with Brian there. And also, a few weeks ago or thereabouts, about 4 webinars ago, Brian Sletton also did a public webinar, and you can find that on the No Fluff homepage, nofluffjuststuff.com. If you're on a desktop display, you'll see 3 columns of the conferences coming up, the virtual workshops coming up, and then the webinar replays. And so you'll find that on No Fluff Just Stuff, blockchain time for clarity. So that was a conversation we had about a month or so back. But if you want to dive deeper, we've got that live training on blockchain as well. And so to Mark's point, Mark added that I always thought blockchain's use case was entirely as a ledger, and wouldn't necessarily see it as a transport mechanism. And I also wonder if it's heavy. If it's a little heavy for our purposes, because when I think of blockchain, I see it. It gives us that ledger, certainly, but like an event source system would do that as well, as long as we have and that event source becomes a centralized trust. And I've always felt like a blockchain solves the problem of decentralized trust, but I don't know if in an enterprise we definitely need the complexity of the decentralized approach.
I agree with you. In fact, when I was using the blockchain for the tracker, I used it just for the ledger, for that intent. So yeah, I don't know if I would use it for transport, but like I said, I can't say 100%. I'm not experienced enough to know, make that recommendation.
And I think we're coming to the end of the questions that we've got so far. We've got
Brian did ask about alluding to keeping the conversation going with community. Any that you participate in? There are. So that's a good question. I'm sorry, Mike, just that last one.
No, go for it. I missed that one, so perfect.
No, that's good. So one thing I did do is I've looked at a few of the communities. Like I said, I'm very lucky to work in a nonprofit organization where we are an associates. That means everybody who's involved in privacy can talk to each other. You have names, you have those contacts. So definitely try to join something such as those. The other one is, believe it or not, a lot of these language communities, and I'm in the Rust language community. I enjoy it very much, but Java, whatever you're into, start asking around with that. And believe it or not, there's going to be some hashtags for it. That actually, and I've been following some of those and watching what's going on. But you're probably going to hit the same thing I did, which is it's starting, it's growing, and it's hard to find a community that's thinking this way because it's new. And I'm not kidding when I said we are where security was 10 years ago. We're starting it. So now is a great time to start those communities. And a lot of them that are out there right now are legal, but that's a place to start, because how am I going to implement what legally has to be supported? And that's where those, so I don't have names right away. I'd be like, oh yeah, these are it. My own experience, I've been doing this for about 2 years now, trying to find privacy communities. There are some out there, but it's really not for the technical. That's the whole part, right? It's the technical community that I'm trying to look for. So if you do have it, please send it to me on LinkedIn. I will forward it out to everyone else. Anyway, if you want to start a community, I will promote you on that one.
Okay, thanks, David.
And I saw one more thing pop into the chat here. I've got a I've lost my, oh, there it is. Okay. So Jonathan says DSL as a mechanism for enforcing chain of custody with digital data seems questionable, but now that we've got NFTs, so maybe there's a way of leveraging an embedded blockchain for controlling data. And then he adds, on the other hand, seems an awful lot like DRM.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm not very strong in blockchain, so I can't really comment on that one.
No worries. And we are at the top of the hour, so we've got to wrap up. But I do want to thank everybody for taking the time to join us today. And of course, we will be diving deeper into this topic as we go on, and also watch the No Fluff site for additional depth on this topic. And of course, one of the nice things, if you subscribe to the virtual training series, you get access to all of the webinars as well, and those are the record, or not the webinars, but the historical trainings that we've done. So those recordings, the slides, and all of that is also available. But once again, huge thank you to everybody who's taken the time out of their Friday to join us, if it is Friday where you are, and especially thank you, David, for your time and your generosity to join us and continue to share your experience and expertise. It is this spirit that makes our community so wonderful. And so
and it's a great community. I gotta admit, No Fluff Just Stuff, amazing community to be part of. So for all of you who have joined, you'll enjoy it if this is your your first webinar. It's a great community.
Indeed. Oh yes. Oh yeah. Mark. Yes, the daylight savings time, or saving, I guess. It's so much easier to say savings, but for whatever reason. But yes, that's right. We're here in the U.S. We changed the clocks, and so that's that. The only nice thing is that I have a lot of meetings with colleagues overseas, and they're not on the same schedule. So some of my 6 a.m. meetings have become 7 a.m. meetings, which is much preferable. But anyway, we've got to wrap up. So once again, thank you. Right. And I'm going to hand it over to you, David, to give the last word.
Yeah, the last word being, privacy is everyone's responsibility. And I always think of it like this. We're not building software for other people. We're building it for customers like us. And how I want to be treated, that's what I'm going to architect and design for. So just remember, it's all about treating people with privacy in mind, humanely, the way we want to be treated in our digital citizenship.
Love it. Thank you so much. Look forward to seeing you at one of these online events soon, and at one of our live events in due course. Everybody take care, stay healthy, stay safe, stay sane, and we'll see you soon.
Have a good one, everyone.